Thank you, Dr. Rosenberg. I now recognize Mr. Moore for his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. For the record, my name is Rod Moore. I'm Executive Director of the West Coast Seafood Processors Association. Our association represents commercial fishermen and shore-based American-owned seafood processors and associated seafood businesses located in Washington, Oregon, and California. Our members also have operations located in Alaska, Arizona, Georgia, Hawaii, Nevada, Texas, and Utah. Our main objective is to assure the regular supply of sustainable seafood so we can provide healthy products to the consumer. Let me make one thing clear from the beginning. A well-designed marine sanctuary is not a bad thing. Just as on land, there are special places in the ocean that deserve protection. Nobody wants to see trawlers trawling up pieces of the USS Monitor or a deep-sea sport fisherman pulling up coral from flower garden banks. However, there's a big difference between a marine sanctuary and a national marine monument. There is a process and there are criteria for establishing a sanctuary. To begin with, the process is locally driven. Under, quote the NOAA webpage, every nomination starts at the community level. While NOAA's concept of a community may not be the same as ours, there at least has to be a local nexus. NOAA then reviews the nomination against several criteria, including existing management regulations and against community support. Only if the proposed area passes muster, or at least the red face test, will it be placed on NOAA's list of nominated areas for consideration to be designated as a national marine sanctuary, which is an entirely separate process. Unfortunately, this process isn't good enough for some people. We've seen public calls to the President to use his powers under the Antiquities Act to establish marine monuments off New England and Alaska. In the latter case, a nomination for a sanctuary was denied by NOAA. Undaunted, the public employees for environmental responsibility set up an online petition for which, as of last week, they had nearly 114,000 supporters. Of course, that included signatories from 28 foreign countries. In fact, there were more foreign signatories than there were from the state of Alaska, including a lone signature from the Lao Democratic People's Republic. In the former case, proponents didn't even bother with the sanctuary nomination. They went directly to the monument petition route. They did this in spite of the fact that the New England Fishery Management Council was working on a fisheries habitat plan that would protect some of the same places that are covered in the petition. So why this rush to action when a perfectly good, workable, and science-based sanctuary nomination process is readily available? The obvious answer to our industry is that the proponents wish to shut down most commercial fishing and control whatever commercial and sport fishing there are left. And this gets to the heart of the matter. Under the Antiquities Act, the President can withdraw whatever federal lands he wants and have that withdrawal managed using any criteria he chooses. Don't like trawling? Poof, it's gone. The Antiquities Act provides no basis for learned discourse, no scientific, economic, or social analysis. It is whatever the President says it is. The use of the Antiquities Act to create marine national monuments is a true top-down dictatorial approach, which is frequently championed by big bucks environmental groups and in which the public, including the fishing community that is directly affected, has no voice. So what are the alternatives? The first, obviously, is by submitting a nomination through the sanctuary process. The second alternative, one which I prefer, is to establish sensitive areas under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And how well does this work? Well, using the West Coast, it works pretty well. In 2005, the Pacific Fishery Management Council completed its review of EFH and HAPSI areas. In 2014, began its formal review of those areas. During this process, leaders from the fishing industry and the environmental community decided they had more to gain by working together than fighting with each other. So they established the Collaborative EFH Working Group. The collaborative is working on a comprehensive plan of habitat protection and access to fisheries, which, if adopted, will increase the permanent closed areas significantly, while recognizing that there are areas that are now closed but should be opened. Although one environmental group has bowed out of the process, and some fishermen are reluctant to trust those that remain, the majority of us have hope for the future. And I learned last night a similar situation has occurred in the Mid-Atlantic Council, which has won praise from the environmental community. Finally, a word about legislation pending before this committee and the House. The House has already passed H.R. 1335, which, among other things, makes clear that the FCMA is the controlling legal statute in fisheries management. This will resolve such strangled legal interpretations like the one provided to the Pacific Management Council by NOAA's legal counsel, that the council has jurisdiction over fishing in the ocean bottom but doesn't have jurisdiction over the water column. Mr. Chairman, there's no doubt in my mind there are certain key areas in the ocean that need protection. The question is how best to do it. I think you would find that most rational people agree that protecting an area should be conducted only after scientific analysis and a true public process. The use of the Antiquities Act should not be allowed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. And finally, Mr. Oliver, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to comment today. The North Pacific Council, one of 8 regional fishery management councils established by the Magnuson-Stevens Act, manages the fisheries off of Alaska. A few statistics I would recite that many of you have heard before. The fisheries off Alaska provide over half the nation's annual seafood production, are the largest employer in the state of Alaska. They're second only to oil and revenues, and have been sustained between 3 and 5 billion pounds annually for over 30 years. A statistic you may not have heard, these fisheries occur within the 1.3 million square mile area managed by the Council, of which about 2/3, or 66%, is currently closed to all or some fishing activities. Many of these areas qualify as marine protected areas. Our ecosystem-based management approach is not focused on fisheries extractions alone, but includes explicit consideration of numerous related components of the ecosystem, including, importantly, the use of geographic area closures to fishing activities. Closure areas in the North Pacific have been implemented for a variety of reasons, including essential fish habitat designations and a number of other reasons. I've attached maps to my written testimony which provide a visual representation of the scope and magnitude of some of these closed areas. I've listed a few of the most significant, including the U.S. Arctic EEZ, where nearly 150,000 square miles is closed to all commercial fishing as a precautionary measure. Bottom trawl closures to develop to protect essential fish habitat cover over 400,000 square miles in the northern Bering Sea and throughout the Aleutian Islands. Managed throughout the Aleutians, closed to bottom trawling to protect pristine habitat and to freeze the footprint of existing bottom trawling. What all of these closure areas have in common is that they were all implemented based on careful consideration of scientific information, detailed analysis of biological, economic, and social impacts, and with extensive input from all affected or interested stakeholders, as well as the state of Alaska. The Council process, operating through the authorities of the Magnuson-Stevens Act and subject to approval by the Secretary of Commerce, has demonstrated that it is by far the best equipped to manage fishing activities within the U.S. EEZ, including the identification and designation of areas appropriate for protection. This process includes outreach to and input from fishing industry participants, local coastal residents, and environmental organizations. I would like to specifically highlight the Aleutian Island Habitat Conservation Area closures, which were established as part of the Council's Essential Fish Habitat process, mandated under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. This map illustrates the careful balancing achieved by this process and the necessary complexity resulting from consideration of numerous management objectives. This particular map shows the open and closed areas for only a single target species, Pacific cod. The result is that only about 6%, the little areas that you can see in beige, only about 6% of the entire area remains open to bottom trawling. However, it is that 6% which was identified through the Council process as the most critical to the continued viability of economically and socially valuable commercial fishing activities in this area. Unilateral closure of this area would be unnecessarily devastating to the fishing industry, to numerous remote coastal communities who are heavily dependent on fishing activities in this region, and to the U.S. as a whole. This balancing act is not only possible through the Council process, it's precisely what the Council process was set up to do. Other councils around the region have implemented similar closures. I've listed some of those off of New England, off of the Mid-Atlantic, where it was noted they recently closed an area more than 38,000 square miles, nearly the size of Virginia, and off the Pacific coast by the Pacific Council, where they have already designated over 130,000 miles of EFH conservation area. A flip side story exists in the Western Pacific, Mr. Chairman, as stark contrast to these examples of a deliberative science-based closure designations can be found in the Western Pacific region, where U.S. fishermen governed by the Magnuson-Stevens Act and managed by the Western Pacific Council have lost about 30%, or 665,000 square miles of fishing waters to monument and sanctuary designations with little or no evidence of benefits. In summary, area closures to fishing or other activities are indeed an important natural resource management tool, and they've been applied extensively in the North Pacific and in other regions of the United States. Successful use of this resource management tool requires a careful balancing of multiple considerations, which is not possible under unilateral actions such as monument designations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, thank you, panel, and thank you for your valuable testimony. And I believe we'll begin with questions. And now recognize myself for 5 minutes.